Welcome to Spiritual Changemakers, the podcast that guides you through tough times with practical tools and inspiring stories. I'm Andrea Thomas, your host and the Sacred Transitions Coach. Join us as we hear from spiritual changemakers who have connected with their higher power and overcame adversity. Whether you are navigating a difficult transition or seeking to deepen your spiritual practice, our podcast provides guidance to help you find magic in the change. Come on this journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and transformation with us and unlock your potential to become your best self. A few months ago in Dubai, I met a lot of great people there where we will talk all about depression and burnout. Welcome, Renato. So excited to have you here.
My
Well,
pleasure.
I would love to allow you to give you some space to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit. I know you are a movement, empowerment coach. Tell us a little bit more about what is it that you do.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having invited me to your beautiful live podcast. I really enjoy that. And to answer your question, so what I'm most passionate about is helping people to get more in tune with themselves. This is much because it's my own journey as well, right? Most coaches or most people who are sharing, teaching something, they come from their own expertise, from their own experience. And so in my case, it's no different. I found myself to be a chubby child, not wanted by anyone. Like I was very alone and disconnected as a child and as an adult later on as well. So I naturally resorted to things that helped me to start become more in tune with myself, first physically, later emotionally and mentally. And that's where I found great tools and assets to, of course, help myself first to feel and become more sensitive and more connected and in tune with myself and others. And then later on, I found that this actually helps other people too. So from the place of self-inquiry, I found tools then who would ultimately help others well. But it wasn't the intention. I didn't investigate with the purpose to become a coach. I naturally just happened to attract people who would then benefit from what I've learned, if that makes sense.
Yes, it sure does. And thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your story. And I love to ask my guests now about spirituality. How would you define spirituality? Because I want to give our audiences a very broad spectrum on how you can look at spirituality and connect with it from different angles.
Mhm. I love that question because I think spirituality is a little over dramatized, if that makes sense, in our society right now. There's like culture around wanting to be spiritual or you're not spiritual and it's important to be spiritual, etc. So I think that question is it's very valid, it's very important. The way that I see it, right? And that's just my perception of it. And I want to really disclaim that because I personally think it's an experience from person to person that varies. I personally believe we are spiritual. It's not something that we can do necessarily. We can just connect with it more, perhaps. And the way that I notice that is through sensitivity. Now, if somebody wishes to get more in tune with their spirituality, then I would suggest to ask yourself, perhaps, how sensitive are you? How are you dealing with frustration? Are you just pushing it away or are you able to, actually let it flow? Because the way I teach or the way I learned from myself is that there is different layers to our existence. We have the subconscious layers from the physical, emotional, then to the conscious level, and then ultimately to the spiritual level. If you will just look at it as a tube, yes, that you're coming from the bottom upward. And so the more we are in tune with the subconscious levels of our existence and that starts to flow naturally, it naturally goes up, right? And it naturally starts to also come from the top downward and it starts to channel up and down. So I think the way I saw it is just through sensitivity, really feeling and following those notions that are happening inside of us that naturally brings you more in tune with life and whatever energies are around us without necessarily having a chance to meditate and whatnot, but whatever helps to, come to that place of sensitivity, of attunement with our senses, like how we feel inside, whatever wants to get out of our like insides, into the nature and the people around us. And then naturally we become a more healthy part of that web that connects everything. That's
Such a
at least how I
yes, this is how you view it. Amazing. Thank you so much for your point of view on this. I really appreciate it. And today we are going to talk on a subject that is pretty much your expertise. Now, what you have been through, what you have been helping people with, and it's really healing from burnout and depression. I would like to take the audience just a little bit back on when this has started for you. For example, the depression, when have you realized it? What were the symptoms that you're like, oh my God, I'm actually right now dealing with depression? And
Mhm,
then what are the steps that you took in that moment to bring yourself out of it? This is the journey I would like to bring our audience on.
mhm, mhm. It's a beautiful, beautiful topic because I think it's still largely misunderstood what depression really is. People are throwing with those words around simply because they are looking for another way to attract attention to their wounds and pains, which I understand and I see, and I did that with myself. So that's also where I see how intriguing it is, to use those terminologies in order to get more attention. Now, depression means nothing else than to suppress, and it can be anything. Usually in this context, is an emotional suppression. So you're pressing down something as to not feel it. And then there's different like variations of how to depress. I experienced and still do some experience to some degree a form of depression called bipolar disorder. So I'm on the spectrum of bipolar disorder where you are suppressing and then it explodes up. So it's like you are either very numb or you're very, very sensitive. And naturally, how I experienced it was just, I have these days. It's like the female hormonal cycle where you just have your days. And sometimes for me, there was just minutes throughout the day. And then sometimes it was just days on end where I just felt miserable and not connected. And it was just, everything was nasty. Like you could tell me anything, basically, hey man, there's like $1 million on the street. You can grab it if you like. It was just still miserable. That I would continuously find how I am hurt, how I am put into misery, right? How life is against me, if you will. And then it would just rebound and go all to the other extreme. And life was just incredibly exciting and so full of life and wow. And and you would just really love to be alive more and more and more. And so it would just bounce back and forth. And I would experience that from perhaps the age of maybe 16, 17, when I started to leave home. Before that, I would just go very introverted. Like I wouldn't want to talk to anyone. I would continuously like read books, would just play video games, had no friends. I would be very shy to connect with other people, which was absolutely the opposite to how I was up until like maybe the age of 6 or 7, until I got into school. Before that, I would connect with everyone. I was always the happy child, was continuously like all over the place. And then I started to learn these social dynamics within school. And there was like a couple of very traumatic experiences in school that taught me that I'm way too much, right? In my expression. Authentic expression would not be tolerated, not be wanted, be suppressed. And so that then led to that like inwardly suppression of any form of expression, if you will. Yeah. And then, I mean, the big shift came ultimately when I found that like I started to burn out because of it, because ultimately I recognized on a deep level that I am just not wanted. I'm not lovable, regardless what I do. And so because of that, I started to go into overdrive. I also always experience people telling me I'm a dreamer. I don't know how to manage life. What I'm doing is ludicrous. Like, it's just this sort of conversations. So I started to wanting to become the opposite of that. Started to work a lot, travel a lot, become very knowledgeable, articulate, connect, etc. So just really to bypass these judgments that I have learned that I am supposed to be am. And so what 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 did that like is basically I couldn't stop, right? The momentum picked up. I became faster and faster and faster and better and better and better. better looking, better in whatever I do. I would do bodybuilding, etc. So I was blowing up a huge ego over the course of around like 8 to 10 years. That would help me prevail, right? That would help me to make sure that I am never this bullied kid again that has to like stay indoors, literally. And that led overdrive, that led to burnout, to like three of these, huge clashes. And yeah, and then ultimately out of that grew who I am today.
So I've heard a couple of things there. I heard you saying that the reason why you have started suppressing who you are, your expression, and so on, it was when you went to school, when you felt that I'm not accepted for who I am and for my authentic self. I cannot fully express myself because you said until 6 or 7, you were like super extrovert, all over the place, like very playful and so on. And then you started suppressing. But your depression started at 16, 17. Then you're going through these stages where honestly, until I moved to United States, I never heard the words bipolar, ADHD, all these labels, I would say, when I was there. And I would keep like, it's a very common thing in the United States to hear these terms. I'll be like, what is that? And I'm wondering with this labeling of our symptoms, of our experiences, of our ups and downs, how do you think that actually helps people, that actually helps the population overall to be like, oh, I'm just, because I feel like a lot of people can actually use that as an excuse. I'm just bipolar. I'm just ADHD. I'm just whatever to make an excuse. So they don't take the necessary steps to make the changes.
Mhm. Yeah, so that's a couple of different topics. I would love to start with the labeling. I did not know that I was depressive, and I was depressive largely from the age of 7 to 8 onward. So I did not know that. Nobody labeled me. I was very lucky that I wasn't stuffed into some form of, hospitalized analytics where people would just intellectualize what's going wrong with me or not. I would also not know that I'm on the spectrum of ADHD. So these things, nobody told me. There was certainly some fears or anticipations, perhaps from my mom, which I would later then understand. But I would only know that I was suffering from these symptoms once I was starting to educate myself on mental health, on trauma, et cetera, et cetera. And largely because of my, say, very, very early traumas, I wanted to understand like how did that affect me? How did that create the person that now stands here in front of you talking to you? And that was when I started to identify, wait a second, like this all checks the boxes and this also too. And so I think in terms of labeling, it doesn't actually help in the sense of change anything. Now, what it does though, is it gives you a clear lead as to how you can approach something. And so I think that's also what you've been addressing. People are, throwing around with these labels and topics, not necessarily wanting to change anything, but just wanting to belong to some place and be that, well, I'm just belonging to the bipolar tribe now, or I'm belonging to the ADHD tribe. So I think that's largely misunderstood how people are actually able to, say, grow understanding these spectrums, because that's really what they are, right? You don't have it, you experience it. It's not something that you have in your back pocket and you run away. And it's like, hey, by the way, I have bipolar in my back pocket. It's something that you experience, something part of your system. And with that, it's also adapted and intelligently integrated into your behavior. It's not something that just sits on top like your beautiful hat there. That you could say like, well, I have the bipolar hat. It's something that is part of your system. And as such, it's like a finger or a hand, perhaps, that you want to understand and start to learn how to work with it. Because it's not the plan. It's like the way that I've experienced it working with beautiful pioneers and people in that field. It's not so much the idea to get rid of these conditions, but rather to understand how did they come about. This was a very intelligent, say, resolution of a system that found itself jeopardized, that found itself unsafe, and perhaps in a line of danger. So you would start to develop these sort of behaviors. And as such, we need to understand them rather than trying to, it's like, yeah, this is bad. And so I was very lucky to understand, perhaps in the past 7, 8 years that I was dealing with some of these symptoms, perhaps these experiences, and not before. So I was never in danger to, capitalize subconsciously on the label and the belonging that ultimately also results in legs from it. So just to address that.
Yes. And from my understanding, it's really a matter, okay, you've got the diagnosis, yes, that you are ADHD, that whatever label it is, you got the diagnosis, but then it's a matter of how can you actually use that in your advantage to educate yourself around it, to educate, okay, what are the angles that I can actually approach this diagnosis from to help myself, and make sure we don't use it from a point where it's just an excuse for you not to create the change. And this is where I feel like they're very close together, because people that still believe in the victim mentality, and there are still a lot of people out there, they just gotta use all these external labels and circumstances as a reason on why not to create the shift within themselves. And that's where the true change starts. Because you mentioned at the beginning, you started this by embodying it yourself, by really applying and educating yourself into this topic for yourself. So you embody it, you applied it, and you're like, oh my God, this works so well. And then people started reaching out to you on how you can help others as well. And for those that maybe they don't even know they're dealing with depression, and of course, depression and burnout, they can be at different levels. But what would you say would be some main symptoms, main characteristics that people can like look right now in their life and be like, am I dealing with depression and I'm not aware because I'm just putting a rock under, and I'm ignoring it?
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic to talk about. For him, something that I came to the conclusion with this is that we should not fool ourselves in terms of like the spread of these experiences. I would even say that around perhaps like 83 to 85% of our society deals with some form of depression, some being on the spectrum of depression. Because again, what it really does is we don't want to look into certain experiences, certain emotional experiences, right? It's depressing emotions. Now, that being said, a symptom would be, how well are you embracing when you're sad? Are you okay with being sad? Is that something you do? Or are you say like, oh shit, no, I'm sad again. Like, trying to wiggle yourself around it or out of it. Another symptom would be like when I ask people, so how are you doing? Yeah, I'm good. That's a very promising symptom because simply like, so if I am asking someone, how are you doing? And this person says good, means that they're not willing to describe how they really are, or maybe they even lack the vocabulary to describe how they are. And so what I would then say is like, well, good does not describe anything. It just means that from the 0 point onward, you're just above it. And there's everything above and there's everything below. So you don't actually touch on your experience. You don't allow to feel and to perhaps like name what you feel. Maybe like, I'm excited. I am so happy. And then people would say, yeah, but I don't have time. No. You don't actually like to talk about how you feel. Perhaps because it's a stranger, because you don't feel safe, et cetera, right?
I want us to give people a different way of asking, because I know if you like the majority of times, if you ask, how are you? It's like an automatic thing. How are you? I'm good. It's like an automatic question, not an automatic response. So what are some other questions that we can actually ask people that we interact with, so we actually get a different answer?
How do you feel?
How do you feel?
Yeah. How do you feel? Because people will still answer with good or bad or not so good or difficult. They will still go lengths to try and not address how they feel. And that makes people very itchy. And it has become somewhat of a practice to me to ask people how you feel. And then once they get a good, I'd say like that actually just doesn't describe how you do. So I would really love if you have the time and you feel inclined to share with me how you actually feel, what's going on inside of you. And that's usually when people start to actually, wait a second. So actually I feel overwhelmed a little bit. I feel kind of like irritated perhaps or frustrated, whatever. And that's kind of like on a very subtle level how we can start to interact more consciously with our like with the people around us. To simply ask and not take a good or a bad for, as the answer. And usually people don't even ask with wanting to get an answer, they just do it out of politeness, out of friendliness, whatever. So to come back to the question where you asked me in terms of how to identify that you are dealing with depression, is literally that. How much do you care for the emotional state of either yourself and or other people? And how much can you actually name and give it a space as to what's going on inside of you or someone else?
Yes, and for those that are numb, like I'm one of the people that was numb probably for 15 years. I was fully numb. I couldn't feel anything. And I never realized that it's not okay until someone really addressed that. When I remember it was the summer and we were breaking up after we've been together, like a group of us. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like I couldn't really feel anything. She's like, oh my God, why are you not sad or even like excited or something? Like you don't feel anything? And I'm like, not really. And that was the point that I started questioning. I'm like, wait, why am I actually not feeling anything? Am I just different from everyone else? And I was constantly searching for adrenaline in order for me to feel something. I was pretty much addicted to these wild experiences, challenges to feel. And even then, I was barely able to spark anything. I remember I had 1 year, I think, when I started on my healing journey, when I cried almost every single day. I allowed myself to go into my past memories, into my past experiences, into my past traumas, and really feel the pain that I never addressed. And I didn't even realize that I had traumatic experiences until I've done that. So for me, it was taking myself into the past and really feeling the painful, traumatic experiences and allow myself to cry. Like I cried, I screamed, I yelled, I really expressed all that trauma that was stored within my body and my memory. So that was like the beginning stages of my healing journey, besides the fact that I was working with healers. Like I worked with healers, with coaches. So I did ask for external support as well. And now I would love to hear from you. What are some things that you would recommend for people that are not right now?
I really appreciate how you're sharing, like to go back to past experiences and kind of like resolve what happened there. The way I found it's to be accessible and simple enough, perhaps, because I really appreciate simplicity, was to simply ask myself, like, how often throughout my day can I ask myself what I feel? So, how often throughout my day can I ask myself how I feel and not taking a good or a bad for an answer? So, like, how do I feel right now? I feel rather sensitive. Maybe I feel a little overwhelmed. I feel excited. And then that's it. So, not making like a story out of it in the first approach. First of all, just to be able to become more aware. The way I see it, there's a simple enough step-by-step process. First, you become aware of it, right? Then you accept it. And then you allow yourself to make a choice other than what you're used to. So becoming more present also with your choices. The first step, however, is always becoming more aware to just simply acknowledge what's happening, because that's usually where depression is most prominently happening, right? It's like we're not even aware what's happening inside of us. And usually we're not present either, because that would, resensitize us.
Yes, we tend to distract ourselves all the time, so we don't
Yes.
feel. So we don't feel the sadness, we don't feel the overwhelm, we don't feel the distraction. And I'm even wondering myself why us as humans are we so afraid of feeling our feelings, of feeling the sadness, of feeling the anger? Because the majority of people that are not numb, yes, are good with feeling the joy, the excitement, and so on. But when it comes on the other spectrum of really embracing the beauty of sadness, the beauty of grief, the beauty of each and every emotion, because every emotion has something to teach you.
Mm.
Why do you think people avoid to feel those emotions? Besides the fact that it's painful, but where is this coming from?
Mhm. So when we are looking at the underlying needs that ultimately spark our emotions in relation to those needs, it becomes inherently important to understand what needs are per default or how we learn that certain needs are not met. And one of the most prominent needs that we now become more and more aware of on a collective basis is that the need of safety and stability, certainty, that we can be certain that resources are provided, shelter is provided, perhaps belonging is provided, anything else, right? So it's one of the most fundamental needs to feel safe and certain and stable. Now, what tends to happen is that when we feel anxious, when we feel uncertain, etc., these are all related emotions to that need, to the need of stability and certainty. Now, we don't want to acknowledge that we're not certain. We don't want to acknowledge that we are unstable. We don't want to acknowledge that we're not safe. Because what would happen if we would do? If you would actually acknowledge that I don't feel safe in this environment, I would have to change the environment. Now, perhaps I don't have the tools, or I have learned that I'm not smart enough to actually take decisive actions, or maybe I'm not courageous enough to challenge the current status quo. So what I do is rather a very intelligent notion is just to think it away. I can handle this, right? It's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. I can pull through. I just had a beautiful conversation with a friend yesterday. She just recently became a mom of a beautiful little girl. And so her vocabulary shows that she's continuously pulling through and making things happen, making things work. But what that also means is that she is in constant needs to having to stabilize an environment within which she doesn't feel actually safe to just relax because she has to do it all on her own. And so now if we are continuously under the impression that if I don't handle things, everything going to fall apart and I either feel worse or even less safe, that ultimately leads to us dreading that sense of instability and then uncertainty. So nobody wants to feel that, right? Nobody feels like inclined to wanting to go down that road.
Yeah.
Unless they recognize that there is an incredible resource of energy down there. Because once we are finding the root causes for us to not feel stable and safe, what naturally tends to happen is that we can shift small little gears instead of having to change the whole entire environment. It usually doesn't require us to change everything that we are experiencing, like the whole place, everything. There's usually just one little thing. Then that can be to find reasons to be safe. That can be that I learned that I'm not safe is actually not adequate anymore. It's actually not accurate anymore. It's just a mirror image of 20, 30, 40 years ago, when in fact I was just, subject to whatever changes happened around me with all these huge humans. Now I'm one of those huge humans. There's no reason for me to feel unsafe, but the inner child still remembers that. It's still happening, right? And so by not looking at it, we waste tremendous lots of energy. Whereas just looking at it would be very scary and takes a lot of courage, yes, but it would change the entire environment inside to large degree. And so there would be so much change suddenly outside as well.
Yes, and what I'm taking out from what the beautiful share that you just did with us, It's really going back to yourself and asking, what do I need in this moment? Like, if you feel sad, if you feel frustrated, whatever, if you feel an emotion that it's hard for you to embrace, it's hard for you to feel, maybe go into the step of, what do I need right now? Maybe you need sleep, maybe you need food, maybe you need water, maybe you need safety, as we just mentioned. But how can you give that to yourself? Because I think that's a very important factor, not to wait for those needs to be fulfilled by something or someone external. And
Yeah.
really getting back to that connection with self and ask, how can I fulfill my needs right now in this moment, and give
Yeah.
yourself that time and space? Because if you push it away, as we just mentioned, it's going to take so much more energy. And on the long run, it is going to affect your life so much more than if you are able and find the courage to just look at it in the present moment. But that means it requires for you to stop from your busy life and get in touch with yourself and get in touch with your body. And I know you are big on the body movement, and I'm sure this is a tool that you actually use for yourself and for your clients to help with depression and burnout. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think something that I would love to disclaim at this point is that when people are working with these things, even teaching and coaching, and I'm just talking about myself here, right? It does not mean that it's just gone. You are still dealing with that, right? You just found better tools, and ultimately you are on the journey of resolving that and healing that. And so I think to just not fool ourselves, what's really necessary is a lot of courage in the first place. But then, as with everything, how I like to say is the big difference between easy and difficult is only familiarity. Once you become familiar, because for now it's difficult, right? But only because we don't go down there. Now, if you're used to going down there and you are equipped with the necessary tools, such as like feeling and being in touch with your body, with your senses in the here and now, what naturally tends to occur is that it becomes easier and easier to deal with it. And then suddenly one day you wake up like today, just to be honest and frank, like the day started beautiful, but then everything went south. Like everything that just could go wrong went wrong. And like, why today? You know, like I have so many things that are so important today, blah, 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 right? And so like the natural tendency occurs to be like, okay, I'm getting overwhelmed, I'm getting frustrated. And that doesn't stop. Now, I think it's safe to say though that I have now different tools. I just accept it. Yes, I experience that feeling. And yes, things go wrong. And yes, perhaps my behavior may itch some other people, etc., because I'm just, expressing that. And with that, what naturally tends to happen is that I start to become more okay with how I am and who I am. And naturally, people resonate with that more. And so the hiccups, how I like to call them, become less and less because I'm anchoring here and now and in my body. I still do my movement. I still do the things that are important to me to feel and be sensitive. And yes, that makes me more prone to feel also the negative emotions. But because I allow them now and accept them, and also, sometimes the results that come with it, I can say it becomes easier to deal with it because I don't try to fight it because it's still happening, right? Even if you don't like that the moon is shining, what are you going to do? Just hide inside until, it's gone or something. And so I'd rather stay outside and learn how to deal with it and, relax, because ultimately my nervous system starts to acknowledge that this is not the end. I'm not going to die because this inherent fear of this is my livelihood that I have to fight for, this fight or flight response that people are these days like educated to say, it starts to relax naturally because you notice, okay, it's happening. It's happening. It's happening. And then it's gone. And that's okay. So it's not the end of the world. And so you become more okay with sometimes just feeling crap and sometimes things just go wrong. But it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to be because you provoke it. But in time, you just know, this is okay. This is part of it too.
Yeah, and I heard you saying really through this, it's taking ownership and responsibility for shifting out of whatever emotional state you are in that you are not satisfied with, that you're not happy with. And know that it's your responsibility to do that. And instead of distracting yourself, oh, I feel shitty, I'm just gonna go and watch a Netflix movie, or I'm just gonna call a friend, or I'm just gonna do whatever you're used to do to ignore what you're feeling. It's really getting back to yourself and be like, okay, I feel sad. I feel anger. What are some of the tools that I have learned? Maybe from this podcast, maybe from some books that you read, whatever it is. What are some tools that oh, it's the awareness. Let me be aware. Let me sit and accept my emotion instead of ignoring it and keep distracting myself with all these external things so I don't feel it and put it under the rug. So it's going back constantly to yourself and taking self responsibility.
Absolutely. Yes. I think like it's an interesting notion. Once we start to accept what is, we suddenly start to recognize how much we start to try to resist. It's like, that famous, like, I love that meme, honestly. Like, if you wouldn't, like, somebody who always was fat, and I'm just using that language now, but somebody who always was fat, wouldn't know how it feels to be light. Now, once you reverted to be light and you would go back to be fat, you know, you would know, you have a reference point. And so most people don't actually know how much energy they're wasting trying to resist, you know. So the way that I've been taught in terms of depression, the word depression means like pressing down. And so what are you pressing down? It's pressing down the emotions. Now, the most beautiful metaphor I found brings that to light, imagining a balloon that you're trying to push underwater. Now, this is not, I didn't invent that metaphor, but I just love to use it. Now, imagine you would have to press a balloon down once and just let it go. No problem. Try to hold it down a little bit and then let it go. Still no problem. Now try to hold it down for good. And you just stay there and try to hold it down because that's what you do now. And you don't even notice that you're putting it down, but Jesus, the energy that is used to putting it down, it just still wants to go up, right? And so like we're wasting a tremendous lot of energy by maintaining a certain appearance, an image perhaps, like I'm all fine, I'm all cheesy, I'm good. Sure, until you're not. And then you're surprised by your own internal environment because you never looked into it. And so that starts to stress people out then. And they're surprised what's going on inside of them because they never look.
Yes.
And so that costs relationship, it costs business. If somebody wants to do business, it costs, like livelihood, life quality as such. You start to not feel in tune with what's happening around you, continuously being frustrated, all these results that most people are experiencing so often. It's just to not go in there and say like, yeah, right now that's what's happening. And maybe there's going to be a different moment, but for now, that's what's happening.
It's really from my experience, as I have been probably one of the knowledge person that you could have met. Also, when I have learned the tools around how to handle my emotions, how to deal with them, because especially if you have been out for years, yeah, allowing yourself to feel the sadness, to feel the anger, to feel the grief, it can be very scary because maybe you've never done that in your life. So having some tools, having support next to you while you are doing that, it's important. So make sure when you go on this journey that you have at least some super easy tools that you can utilize right away that are like automatic for you and you can use right away. And for me, one of the tools it was to really identify where do I feel that emotion within my body, like give it a color, give it a shape. And then I was literally feeling it all for a few seconds and allowing it to get in touch with it and be like, okay, what is it that this emotion wants to communicate to me right now? And a lot of times you just want it to be seen. You just want it to be acknowledged. And then I would imagine how I literally like pull out that emotion out of my body and I throw it out of the window. And that worked for me. It might not work for everyone, but it worked for me when I started on my journey. So to see it and imagining how you like creating a bowl and just throw it out of the window or throw it into the trash and just releasing it because it's feel and release. That has been my experience. Feel and release. So you allow the emotion to transmute, to that energy to move through your body and then eventually go out of your body.
Mm. Beautiful. Absolutely. I think so. If the question is like what sort of tools or practices I would can do, then I would definitely recommend as well, like to just be asking that question as to, so what's exactly happening inside of you? And I love how you are putting it in perception of giving it a shape, giving it a color. What I've noticed works well for me and the people that I work with is to simply give it the name, finds the name that is related to this emotion, and then allow it to be, because it naturally goes away once it's seen. As you said yourself beautifully just now, it just wants to be seen. So now acknowledge it. Imagine it's part of you. You cannot try to throw away a hand. You throw away your hand, you also throw away the potential that your hand could give you. So now just allowing that emotion to come up fully, allowing it 100% to be there, giving it that name, such as like excitement or perhaps sadness or whatever it is, and just allow that to fully be. And you will notice the more you allow it to be, the more naturally it will just dissolve, because that's what it means. That's what it does. It doesn't do anything else. It's just pointing out, hey, that's happening. And that's it. The job's done. There's nothing else that it's going to do. But if it cannot do its job, much like our mind, we are over intellectualizing our mind. It just has a simple job. If you allow it to do its job, it's gone. That's it. There's not much more it needs to do. But the problem is that we are not allowing our system to do its inherent job. And so that's where disease comes from. That's where illnesses come from, because it's just blocking everything inside.
Yes, and I was shocked when I have learned about the correlation between suppressing your emotions and disease within the body. I was like, oh my God, like I think a lot of people are not even aware of this. And there are many people out there who go to the doctor, have certain symptoms, and the doctors are not able to find the cause, to find what is the cause, and they're just treating the symptom. And a lot of times the root cause is blocked emotion that you never ever dealt with. And until you are not addressing that, you're just gonna continue patching the wound, but the wound is gonna get worse and worse because you are not really healing it from the root. So can you touch a little bit more on how these emotions create disease within our body?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's perhaps one of the most important elements to understand in terms of emotions. Now, emotions are energy in motion. I'd like to reframe that and say it's inner motion. Now, any form of motion generates tension. Otherwise, there's like, if I want to lift my arm, in order to do that, there's tension needed. Otherwise, it doesn't go up, right? Now, if we are inhibiting that movement, but the arm still wants to go up, it needs more power to be there. Plus, the movement never actually gets exerted. Like it never actually happens fully. So it just remains there. And that causes tension, excessive tension within the body. We call that stress. Now we have emotional stress, mental stress, physical stress. It is, however, so if you want to put the emotional component between the physical and the mental elements, you see that the emotion is literally the connective conduit between mind and body. It's also referred to like connected to the fascia in our system. So the fascia, just to give people a brief understanding, they act exactly at the same. The fascia are transmitting neurological signals straight to the muscle and tell the muscle what to do. Without the fascia, the muscle wouldn't know what to do. Now the fascia are transmitting that information. And so if the fascia are continuously bombarded from either up and down with information, what's happening is that they start to become tight. And that's what we then call it stored. Because if we don't have some form of practice or some natural release in place to loosen out these fascia, then ultimately they stay stuck. They stay glued and tight. And hence they are, say, like blocked from actually transmitting information more smoothly. And the same happens if we want to go back to emotions to allow, say, like information from mind to body to happen naturally. We need to relax that conduit. Now, for most people, they don't do that because, first of all, they don't acknowledge that there is something happening between. It's just my mind has to do something and the body follows. Now, this is a very inadequate understanding of it. The result of it is excess tension, excess acidic values in your body caused by stress. And if the acidic values start to rise, the pH levels, everything rises, what naturally happens is that you become inflamed. It's like heating up something too long, it's too hot. What naturally happens is that it starts to burn out, right? To burn, to go to cinders and doesn't work anymore. Like the connective tissue don't work anymore. Like it's like there's a lot of different immune diseases, like autoimmune diseases that we now know are caused by, or say like greatly accelerated in their growth and the way that they are starting to show themselves in our system through excess tension, because the tension in the system is too high as for us to be regulating it naturally. And so to go back, how emotions are playing a role, again, they're the conduit. If the conduit is tight, if, say, the tube by which the information goes up and down is cluttered, there's like, it's just, it doesn't work, it doesn't go through there anymore. At some point, it just breaks because the information is still there and still has to go someplace. And we force it and push it, it just doesn't go. It doesn't flow. And so hence the tension rises. And with everything else that has excess tension ultimately blows. In our system, it just starts to deteriorate from the inside out. And these illnesses are one of these symptoms that are pointing out there's way too much tension, way too much stress happening inside of that system. Does that make sense?
It does. It sure does. And thank you for the beautiful explanation. And I know when honestly, it was recently when I actually felt it on my own body, the impact of the emotions. Like I knew about the disease and so on, but because I have worked so much on myself and on my healing, after my partner transitioned, what I was doing, I did a lot of spiritual work, mental work. I worked with my body, but what I didn't do at the beginning was having massages. And when I had my first massage after a few months after my partner transition, I thought I'm gonna die. Like it was so painful. And that's when I realized, oh my God, I have so many emotions stored within my body. And I haven't even thought about addressing that through the physical touch, through the physical massage. I only was addressing it with like coaches, healers, therapists, and needling movement. But I didn't do the physical touch part. And in that moment, I realized the importance of us really releasing the stored emotions that are within our body through all these holistic practices. It's not just one, but we really have to address the way we feel our emotions, the way we get that in touch with our emotions from a holistic perspective. It's not just one way or a best way. It's really finding what does it work for you? What is it that are the tools that you resonate with? And we are getting very close. I cannot believe that we are almost at the top of the hour. We are so close. I would love for you to share what do you want to let the audience with? Like if they are dealing right now with depression and burnout, what would you say they can start doing today in this moment? What do you want to leave them with?
So first of all, thank you so much for this hour. I really appreciate these kind of conversations and the sharing. And I think we all learn so much from each other if we allow it. And as I like simplicity, I would love to leave with a simple quote. Relaxation is a superpower, especially in a hypertense society. And investigating how you can come to a increased relaxation in your system would then lead to everyone's individual, manifestation of that. For me, certainly it has been floating, as you said, massaging. I stretch every day 2 times. I roll out my fascia, but it shouldn't be a coping mechanism. If all these treatments are coping or help me cope with it, I have not found the underlying issue. So one would be relaxation is a superpower, but what causes me to not be relaxed would be the other question I would love to share, to just inquire, like for everybody listening, why are you not relaxed? What are you afraid of? What causes you to be tense or sensitive? Where have you learned that you have to approach your daily life such a way? And answering these questions to the degree where you feel satisfied, not I've answered it and it's done, but actually feeling there's a natural release once we find that key that goes into that lock that we feel. And so looking for that release when we answer questions is something that I would love to share with the audience maybe at this point. And so just to give that away.
Thank you. So having a better understanding, like with the relief, it's like, okay, I've answered and I have a better understanding of where I'm at, why I feel this way, and how can I move forward by taking responsibility, ownership, and really applying the tools that we have shared with you today, because we've shared quite a few things. It was such an incredible conversation. Thank you so much. I feel like I've got so many golden nuggets today on what I can do, how I can understand my emotions, symptoms, how I can deal with them. So I really want to thank you for coming, for saying yes to this. And thank you to each and every one of you for coming, from watching, from listening. We really appreciate your time and your presence, and we don't take it for granted. And I love you, I appreciate you, and I see you. Thanks for tuning in to Spiritual Changemakers podcast. To stay connected and help us reach more people like you, please subscribe, follow, and leave a comment. Join our community of spiritual changemakers on social media to connect with like-minded individuals and continue the conversation. Remember, the power to create positive change is within you. Keep showing up as your best self, and let's keep the magic of change alive. Until next time.